it's Judy. This is my first tutorial for digital art. If you know me, you'd know that I am a traditional artist that is just starting digital art, and I found it very beautiful and everyone can learn it. So I decided to share it with you. I hope you enjoy. So let's draw hairstyles together. I have my reference on layer 1. I'm gonna add another one just to do guidelines, just to make sure that my sketch will be in the right place, right size, and my features will be in everything where it belongs, you know. It's up to you, whatever method you use for sketching, it's up to you. Now on a separate layer, I'm gonna start sketching, but first I'm adding from actions, canvas, I'm adding my reference from image. And now I have my reference on the screen and I can zoom in, it's very convenient. And now on a separate layer, I'm sketching what I'm seeing, just using a normal sketching brush, whatever you like, it doesn't matter because these outlines are just to guide us. And this video is about coloring, not teaching you how to draw. So whatever method you like to use, just use it. If you want to trace it, trace it. If you want to use the grid method, do that. It's up to you. So I deleted the red guidelines, added a new layer and lowering the opacity for the outlines, and now I'm just gonna do a base layer by finding a light color from his skin and filling the whole thing with a hard airbrush. It doesn't really matter what color you use for the base layer, but make sure it's the lightest that you can get from his skin. Whatever you have, it's fine because this will be covered with other shadows and other colors, so it's fine, but it's better than having a white background. And now on a separate layer, using the soft brush, I'm just gonna start adding colors. I'm just noticing where the colors are kind of getting darker and where they're lighter, holding my finger, getting that color, because of course we don't need a color palette for this because we have the reference, and blending that with also the soft brush at a low opacity because I don't want the colors to get mixed very much. And I'm gonna repeat this process for his entire face. I'm gonna only be using the soft brush for laying colors and for blending them, as you can see. And when you start blending, start with the light colors and just work your way out. So whenever you see me do this, and trust me, I will be doing this a lot during this tutorial, I will be using the soft brush for laying colors and also for blending, but at a lower opacity. This is optional, but I'm gonna merge these two layers, the base layer of one color and the layer of these colors, just to have one base layer. And I like to keep my canvas clean, so I'm cleaning it with the hard airbrush eraser. Now let's start coloring his eye. I got this green from his eye, of course, and I created a layer below this iris layer just because I wanted to do the whites of his eye first, because I like to work my way from the back till the front, you know. Now going back to the iris, I created a layer on top of that and chose clipping mask. What that does is keeping everything inside that green circle. So whatever I do, whatever I blend, I don't have to be extra careful not to get out of the iris. So the clipping mask will keep everything inside this circle. And I'm using the technical pen from inking to do these lines you're seeing right now. I use this tool or this brush very much, and you're gonna see me use it a lot. And now after I finished my coloring, I'm just gonna merge the clipping mask with the original iris layer, just because the iris is just one part, so I like to keep each part on one layer. Now create a layer on top of the iris layer, and we're gonna do the outlines of the eye. As you can see, I'm using black. I'm using the technical pen from inking again, and this part is heavily shaded, or it's dark. We're using black but you're gonna see that the other eye doesn't require that much black. And keep in mind that I'm doing all that on the same layer, the eyelid, the eyelashes, just because they're just lines. They don't have any shadows in it, so it's okay to keep it on one layer. And now using also the technical pen, I'm adding some highlights on the whites of his eye on a separate layer, of course, just because I don't want it to blend with the whites. I'm using a technical pen and a soft brush for that. And after I finish, I just merge them. Create a layer on top of the iris layer and below the outlines, because I'm gonna start coloring and I don't want these lines to disappear because the shadows or the colors are below them. So that's why I created a layer below, and I'm repeating the same process I did for his face using a soft brush and blending with also a soft brush with a lower opacity. Now I want to define the line below his eye more, so I'm using a technical pen again and doing that. Whenever you see me draw fine lines or thin lines, so I will be using a technical pen. This is the only inking brush I use. It's very helpful. Yeah. For his bottom eyelashes, I went back to the layer of the outlines and the eyelashes, and I did that, but I lowered the opacity for the technical pen because they are not as visible as the upper eyelashes. And now moving on to his eyebrow, I'm gonna fill it all in with black, and then using a technical pen from inking as an eraser, I'm just gonna erase parts of his eyebrows just to make it look like hair. And that's how important it is to do a base layer of his skin color, just because now after we erased parts of his eyebrows, the erased parts just look like his skin. It's not like white or a weird color that we have to shade later, but they do still look weird. So I'm using the soft brush eraser also just to ease the outlines a little bit, just to make it look like the hair is out of his skin. I want to define the outlines of his nose more, so as I said before, I'm using the technical pen from inking, using the color I found from his face. And can you see these details I'm doing? I'm just doing that with a technical pen at a lower opacity. I'm just gonna blend them later a little bit just to ease them up, and you can see the results. I like to add the highlights at the very end, and the colors are just the lightest color you can find. I add them on a separate layer and blend them very lightly because I want to keep them strong. And as I said before, I'm gonna be repeating this process again and again, but make sure that whenever you do that again, just to build up more colors and more layers, make sure to do that on separate layers, on new layers. Don't do the same layer we did before, just because you don't want these colors or these new colors to blend with the old ones. And now I'm going to repeat the same thing I did for his second eye, starting with the whites because they're in the back, and then the iris, creating a clipping mask and doing the pupil and the outlines and the tiny lines with the technical pen. This eye is lighter than the other one, so the shadows around it will be lighter, of course, and the eyebrow isn't very visible because of his hair, so I'm gonna do that at the very end. And I use a brown shade for his eyelashes just because they are very light and they're not as dark as the second eye. And again, I used a technical pen at a low opacity. And of course, I started coloring the eyelid and around the eye using a soft brush at a low opacity, of course, but don't forget to put them on a separate layer below these lines we just did, the eyelashes, the eyelid. Now moving on to the lips, I picked a very light shade that I found in his lips, did the whole thing as a base layer. It's the same idea, you see I'm repeating, and created a layer on top of it, a clipping mask, just because now I want to add these shadows and these colors without worrying about his skin, and blending that. And I did the inside of his mouth on a layer below this lips layer. And for the teeth, I created a layer on top of the black, did the teeth, but of course these two layers are below the lips, if that makes sense. I just added gray highlights for the teeth, and after I did that, I lowered the opacity for the entire layer because his teeth are kind of faded and I don't want them very strong, so I just lowered the opacity for the entire layer. And now on a new layer on top of the lips, I'm gonna start to do these lines, just random lines according to your reference, using a technical pen and using colors from the lips. And I'm softening the lines with the technical pen from the smudge brushes. So I'm not using the soft brush for blending here. I'm using the technical pen too, just because I don't want the lines to disappear entirely. And here I'm doing the same thing I did for the eyebrow. I'm using an eraser just to ease the outline of the lips. So yeah, an eraser at a low opacity just to make it look more natural. Drawing the beard is pretty easy actually and pretty fun. So after laying the base layer of the color, I'm using the eraser actually to do the hairs here. Technical pen from inking, an eraser, and I'm just drawing random hairs as I'm seeing from the reference. And here I'm just using the technical pen, the color black is whatever you found in his face actually, and I'm just doing one hair at a time. And if you want to shade, make sure to do that on a separate layer below the hairs we're doing. And of course you can just control the opacity of the brush you're using because not every hair is as strong as the other. So sometimes I will lower the opacity and draw some hairs, and other time I might just make it at max and draw the strongest hairs like here. Now for the neck, I went for a layer below his entire face. So I went back to the first layers I created, and I created a layer on top of the very first base layer we ever did. Just because the neck is below the face and I don't want to get whatever I'm doing with the neck on top of the face. Now for his ear, I'm gonna start by laying colors and shadows that the earrings are creating and the curves in the ear, and then we will move on to the earrings that are very fun to draw actually. On a new layer, we're gonna start again by doing a base layer of the color green, whatever the color you found from the reference, cleaning that up as much as you like, and then creating a clipping mask because I don't want to mess the ear, and then just start laying colors from the reference. The highlights and the dark shadows are all in there. I'm adding that on the clipping mask layer and blending that with a soft brush again. I'm laying the colors with the technical pen just because they are very fine and they are very thin and delicate, and blending that. And when you're happy with it, we're gonna start adding the strongest highlights that we're not gonna blend very much, but we're gonna bloom. So from adjustments, pick bloom, and we're gonna make it at like 56%, and that makes it more shiny, as you can see. And now you can just keep adding details until you're satisfied with the results. I added the black details on a separate layer, and I lowered the opacity for the entire layer, and I just merged it with the original one. And I'm finally defining the outlines with a black color, just using the technical pen again and just adding the final touches. For this part of his hair, I created a layer below his neck, his head, his ear, everything, just because it's at the back. So I did full black, and the outer random hairs, I just did them with a technical pen. And now for the hair, start by the base layer, full black, and then pick a brush called Fine Hair from Materials. It's gonna make it a whole lot easier. And I just picked a gray color, and I'm just copying what I'm seeing in the reference. Of course, Procreate kind of made it easier for us, and I don't feel like this is very good for me, so later I will fix it. I'll make it look more realistic. And the hairs on his face, I'm fixing them using a technical pen. Now since the background is clear in this part, so we're gonna use an eraser, a technical pen too. Just erase the parts that you don't want in shape of hairs. And again, of course, I'm drawing these flying hairs using the technical pen. The technical pen here is very useful, and we're gonna use that later when we fix the hair. The fine hair brush is very useful for the hairline because I lowered the opacity and I kind of just merged the hairline with the forehead so it doesn't look weird, and it gave me exactly the effect that I wanted. And of course, I did a little blending using a soft brush just to merge the hairline with the forehead. And now to do the shadows that the hair is creating, create a layer below the hair and just do the same thing we've been doing all along, but below the hair, of course. Now, of course, the background should be the very first layer, and just clean up whatever messes you have, because this is because of the bloom effect. Now, since his skin looks so smooth and no skin is smooth like that, I'm gonna do the skin pores using a technical pen and a color that is darker than his skin, a brown color. Just draw dots, and you don't have to draw the whole thing. You can just duplicate the entire layer and from transfer move it to another place. And when you're happy with your dots, just merge all the layers and go to adjustments and Gaussian blur, and we're gonna blur them out. You don't have to blend here, just blur until you feel like they're good enough and they don't look very weird, and repeat the same process again for anywhere you want. The forehead, maybe here it needs darker color, so I'm just duplicating that again. Merge all the layers and go to adjustments, Gaussian blur, and you're done. And of course, if you want to lighten some areas that might look weird, you can just blend it using a soft brush in the smudge tools, of course. At a low opacity, you will blend it and you will have it nicer. And here I just felt that this area should be darker, so I created a layer below these skin pores that I just did, and I did the exact same thing I've been doing before. And again, I duplicated my skin pores and I moved them to the forehead, also blurred them out. But for the nose, I felt like I needed different shapes of pores, so I did that. So whenever you feel like you need to add some more details, just dot them and blur them. It's very easy and gives very realistic results. Now going back for the hair, I'm using the inking brush, technical pen, using a white color or a very light color, grayish, just to make it look more realistic, in just according to the reference, because it didn't look very realistic to me before, so I just wanted to fix that, as you can see. But of course, it's up to you. You can leave it the way it was. You can do whatever you want, of course. And yeah, that's it. Thank you for watching. I hope you found that useful, because I know there are not a lot of YouTube tutorials explaining digital portraits. Keep in mind that this is just my second try in digital art. I am a traditional artist that is just starting digital art. I love it so much and I found it pretty easy compared to traditional art, so that's why I decided to do tutorials. I hope you found them useful.